Can you bear it when your entire life gets swept away in a single afternoon? And when you turn to your only son, the first thing he says is, "Mom, this place isn't for you." I'm Evelyn, 68 years old, and until 4 o'clock on that Tuesday in March, I thought I knew what home meant. I'd lived in the same little house in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, for 42 years. The yellow kitchen where I'd packed 10,000 school lunches. The living room where my late husband Frank and I had danced to Perry Como on our anniversary every single year. The front porch where I'd rocked my grandbabies when Daniel still brought them by. Then the sirens started wailing. The sky turned that sickly green-black color that every Arkansas native knows means trouble. I grabbed my purse, Frank's old pocket watch from the nightstand, and scrambled down to the basement just as the first window started rattling. The sound above me was like a freight train, mixed with the roar of God Himself, angry and unstoppable. When it finally passed and I climbed those creaking wooden steps, there was nothing left but sky where my roof used to be. Everything gone. The insurance man came 3 days later, clipboard in hand, stepping carefully around the debris that used to be my life. "Total loss," he said, like he was reading the weather. The maximum payout would be around $95,000. Enough to buy a trailer, maybe, but not enough to rebuild 40 years of memories. Not enough to replace the quilt my mother made, or Frank's reading chair, or the kitchen table where Daniel had done his homework every night until he left for college. I gathered what I could salvage. Our wedding photo, somehow still intact in a frame cracked down the middle. My mother's rosary beads, tangled in the branches of what used to be our oak tree. A few pictures of Daniel as a little boy, his gap-toothed grin now water-stained but still precious. And Frank's pocket watch, the one thing that meant everything because it was the last gift he ever gave me before the cancer took him. 3 garbage bags of clothes and a lifetime of love, loaded into my old Honda Civic. Memphis was only 2 hours away. Daniel had a good job there, some kind of management position with a big insurance company. He lived in one of those fancy neighborhoods with street lamps and homeowners associations. Surely, I thought, surely my son would take me in. Just until I could figure out what came next. But when Rachel answered that red front door, her eyes went to my muddy garbage bags before they went to me. "Oh," she said, like I was a package she wasn't expecting. "Daniel didn't mention you were staying." Daniel appeared behind her, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker across his face. Not joy, not relief that his mother had survived, just inconvenience. "Mom," he said, sitting across from me at their pristine dining table like we were negotiating a business deal. "I can give you a few $100. There's a decent motel about 10 minutes from here." No hug, no tears, no "thank God you're alive." Just money, like I was a problem that could be solved with cash. That night, as I sat in my car in the Kroger parking lot with nowhere else to go, I made myself a promise. I'd been silent when Frank died, accepting condolences with grace and enduring the lonely months that followed without complaint. But this time, I wouldn't let anyone bury my dignity. If my son rejected me, fate would open another door, and I would walk through it until I found the justice I deserved. My name is Evelyn Margaret Harrison, though I'd been Evelyn Carter for 42 years until Frank passed. I'm 68 years old, and until that tornado ripped through Pine Bluff, I'd lived what most people would call a quiet, unremarkable life. I'd raised Daniel mostly alone while Frank worked double shifts at the lumber mill. I'd volunteered at church, tended my garden, and sent birthday cards to cousins who never wrote back. Daniel, my Daniel, used to be different. When he was small, he'd climb into my lap after dinner and make me tell him stories about when I was little. He'd save his allowance to buy me drugstore perfume for Mother's Day. When he graduated from college, the first person he called was me, not his girlfriend at the time. "I did it, Mama," he'd said, and I could hear him crying happy tears through the phone. But success changed him. The bigger his paycheck got, the smaller I seemed to become in his life. Phone calls became shorter. Visits became rarer. And when he started dating Rachel 3 years ago, I became practically invisible. Rachel was everything I wasn't: young, ambitious, perfectly put together. She worked in marketing for some company that helped brands optimize their digital footprint, whatever that meant. She lived in a world of networking events and weekend getaways, where everything was photographed and curated and shared online. I was just Daniel's aging mother, with my Walmart clothes and my old-fashioned ways. Their house reflected Rachel's taste: all clean lines and neutral colors, with furniture that looked expensive but felt cold. Everything had its place, including me, which was apparently nowhere. The first night after the tornado, sitting in that parking lot, I'd call Daniel's number at least 6 times. Each time, I'd stare at the screen until it went dark, unable to press the call button. What would I say? "Please love me. Please remember, I'm your mother. Please don't let me die alone in this car." Instead, I'd pulled Frank's watch from my purse and held it against my heart, feeling its steady tick, tick, tick like a mechanical lullaby. Frank never would have let this happen. Frank would have driven through hell itself to bring me home. But Frank was gone, and I was alone in a way I'd never imagined possible. The storm hit Pine Bluff at exactly 4:17 p.m. on March 15th. I know because I was watching the Weather Channel when the siren started, and the last thing I saw before the power went out was that red warning banner scrolling across the screen. The basement was damp and cold, smelling of old concrete and the lavender sachets I'd hung down there to keep the moths away from Frank's stored clothes. When the roaring stopped and I emerged, blinking, into what used to be my living room, I found myself standing under the open sky. The walls were still there, mostly, but everything else was gone, scattered, destroyed. My neighbors' roofs were in my backyard. My kitchen table was embedded in the Hendersons' fence 3 houses down. The insurance adjuster was a thin young man named Kevin, who kept checking his phone while he surveyed the damage. "Total loss," he said, making notes on his tablet. "Policy limit is 95,000. Should get the check processed in about 6 weeks. $95,000. It sounded like a lot until I started thinking about what it would actually buy. Not a house, not in today's market. Maybe a used trailer, maybe a small apartment for a few years, if I was careful." "What about my belongings?" I asked. "My personal items?" Kevin shrugged. "You can claim whatever you can prove, but without receipts." He gestured at the wreckage. "Most people just take the payout and start over." Start over at 68. I spent the next 2 days picking through the debris like a scavenger. My hands were cut and bleeding by the time I'd gathered everything worth saving. That cracked wedding photo, Mama's rosary, a few pictures of Daniel from his school days, and Frank's pocket watch. The one thing that had somehow survived intact, still ticking away in what used to be our bedroom. 3 garbage bags of clothes that smelled like mud and rain and loss. When I loaded them into my Honda, the one thing that had been spared because I'd been visiting the Hendersons when the storm hit, I felt like I was carrying my whole life in those bags. Everything else was just gone, like it had never mattered at all. The drive to Memphis took 2 hours, but it felt like crossing into another world. Pine Bluff was small town Arkansas. Pickup trucks and Dollar Generals and people who waved when they passed you on the street. Memphis was different, bigger, faster. The kind of place where people like Rachel belonged. Daniel's neighborhood was all manicured lawns and colonial style houses with perfect landscaping. I found their address, 3247 Magnolia Grove Lane, and sat in the driveway for 10 minutes, working up the courage to knock. Rachel answered the door wearing white jeans and a silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her eyes went to my garbage bags first, then to my mud-stained shoes, then, finally, to my face. "Oh," she said. "Evelyn, Daniel didn't mention you were—" She paused, clearly searching for the right word. "Visiting." "The tornado," I said. "In Pine Bluff. I lost everything." Something flickered across her face. Not sympathy, exactly. More like the expression people wear when they realize their day just got more complicated. "Of course. Come in." She stepped aside, but her body language was all wrong. Stiff, reluctant. Like she was letting in a door-to-door salesman she couldn't quite figure out how to get rid of. The inside of their house was even more perfect than I'd imagined. Everything was beige and white and artfully arranged. The kind of place where you were afraid to touch anything because it all looked so expensive and fragile. "Daniel," Rachel called up the stairs, "your mother's here." He came down wearing khakis and a button-down shirt, even though it was after dinner on a weekday. Always perfectly put together, my Daniel. Always looking like he belonged in this pristine world he'd built for himself. "Mom." He didn't move to hug me, just stood there, hands in his pockets, looking uncomfortable. "What happened to your house?" I told him about the tornado, about the insurance, about having nowhere else to go. As I talked, I watched his face, looking for some sign of the little boy who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms. But that boy was gone, replaced by this stranger who looked at me like I was a problem he needed to solve. "That's terrible," he said when I finished. And he meant it, I think. But his sympathy felt distant, like he was talking about something he'd seen on the news, rather than his own mother's tragedy. "The thing is," he continued, glancing at Rachel, "this house isn't really set up for— I mean, we don't have a guest room or anything." Rachel nodded. "It's our sanctuary," she said. "We've worked really hard to create a space that works for us. I think you'd be more comfortable somewhere with more privacy, more room to spread out." Privacy. Room to spread out. Nice ways of saying I wasn't welcome. "I could sleep on the couch," I offered. "Just for a few days until I figure something out." "Mom." Daniel's voice was gentle, but firm. "I think it would be better if you got your own place. I can help with the deposit. There's a decent extended stay hotel about 10 minutes from here." He reached for his wallet, pulled out what looked like $300 or $400 bills, like he was paying for a service, like I was a contractor he was hiring to leave him alone. I stared at that money for a long moment. 42 years of motherhood, reduced to a few $100s and directions to the nearest motel. "I see," I said quietly. I stood up, smoothed down my skirt, and picked up my garbage bags. Frank's watch was heavy in my coat pocket. Its steady, ticking the only sound in that perfect cold house. "Thank you," I said, though I wasn't sure what I was thanking him for. "I'll be fine." And I walked out that red front door, carrying everything I owned in 3 garbage bags, while my son and his girlfriend watched me go without trying to stop me. That night, I slept in my car in the Kroger parking lot, moving every few hours when the security guard made his rounds. The bags of clothes made a lumpy pillow, and Frank's watch ticked against my ribs like a mechanical heartbeat. I'd brought my son into this world. I'd loved him and fed him and sacrificed for him every single day of his life. And when I needed him most, he'd handed me money and shown me the door. But I wasn't done. Not yet. The business card had been hidden in my wallet for over 50 years, tucked behind my library card and a faded photo of Daniel's first day of kindergarten. I'd kept it all these years without really knowing why. Maybe because it reminded me of a time when I was young and full of possibilities. Or maybe because some part of me always knew I might need it someday. Robert Hayes. Hayes Construction and Development, Nashville, Tennessee. My high school sweetheart, the boy who'd given me my first kiss under the football stadium bleachers and promised to love me forever. The boy I'd left behind when I married Frank, because Frank was steady and reliable, and Robert was always chasing some big dream that seemed too risky, too uncertain. Now, 50 years later, sitting in my car in that Kroger parking lot with nowhere else to turn, his business card felt like a lifeline. I'd heard through the small town grapevine over the years that Robert had done well for himself. He'd started with a small construction company and built it into something bigger. Never married, people said, though there had been a few serious relationships that never quite worked out. Still carrying a torch, my friend Mildred had gossiped once, but I dismissed it as small town talk. Now I wondered. My hand shook as I dialed the number. It was almost 10 o'clock at night, too late to be calling anyone, especially someone I hadn't spoken to in decades. But I was desperate, and desperate people don't worry about social niceties. The phone rang once, twice. On the third ring, a familiar voice answered. Robert Hayes. Not a secretary, not voicemail. Him, directly. Robert? My voice cracked. It's Evelyn. Evelyn Margaret Harrison. I used to be Evelyn Margaret Harrison. I'm Evelyn Carter now. Well, I was Evelyn Carter, but Frank passed away 3 years ago, so I guess I'm back to being Harrison. Or maybe I should have kept Carter. I don't know. I never really thought about it until... Evelyn? His voice was warm, cutting through my nervous rambling. Sweet Evelyn, where are you? I told him everything about the tornado, about Daniel, about sleeping in my car with everything I owned stuffed into garbage bags. As I talked, I expected him to make polite noises and offer to help me find a shelter or a social services program. Instead, he said 4 words that changed everything. Give me your address. Robert, you don't have to. Evelyn Margaret Harrison, he said, and I could hear him moving around, grabbing keys. You give me your address right now, or I'm going to drive to every Kroger parking lot between here and Memphis until I find you. An hour and 20 minutes later, a silver Lexus pulled up next to my Honda. Robert stepped out, and for a moment, time collapsed. He was older, of course. His dark hair was silver now, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there in high school. But he was still tall and broad-shouldered, still had that easy way of moving that had made every girl in Pine Bluff High School swoon. He walked over to my car and tapped on the window. When I rolled it down, he smiled. That same crooked smile that had made me forget my own name when I was 17. You look beautiful, he said. I started to cry then. Not the polite, quiet tears I'd shed at Frank's funeral, but ugly, desperate sobs that came from somewhere deep and broken inside me. Robert opened my car door, helped me out, and held me while I cried against his chest, breathing in his cologne and feeling safe for the first time in months. "You're home now," he whispered into my hair. "You're home." Robert's house in Nashville was everything Daniel's Memphis home wasn't. Where Daniel's house was cold and perfect, Robert's was warm and lived in. It was bigger than I'd expected. A sprawling ranch style with exposed beams and a stone fireplace that dominated the living room. But it felt comfortable rather than intimidating. "It's too big for just me," he said as he carried my garbage bags inside. I built it thinking I'd fill it with a family someday, but that never happened. Been rattling around in here by myself for almost 20 years. He showed me to the guest room, which was larger than my entire bedroom back in Pine Bluff had been. There was a queen-sized bed with a handmade quilt, a dresser with fresh flowers on top, and a bathroom with a claw foot tub that looked like it belonged in a fancy hotel. "This is too much," I protested. "I can't just—" "You can," he said firmly, "and you will, for as long as you need to." That first night, I soaked in that clawfoot tub until the water went cold, washing away 3 days of fear and humiliation. When I came out, Robert had laid out a soft terry cloth robe and slippers that were somehow exactly my size. "How did you know?" I asked when I found him in the kitchen making tea. "Lucky guess," he said, but there was something in his eyes that suggested it hadn't been a guess at all. Like maybe he'd been hoping all these years that someday I might need a robe and slippers in his house. We sat at his kitchen table until almost 3 in the morning, talking about everything and nothing. He told me about his business, about the houses he'd built and the community center he donated in his mother's memory. I told him about Frank, about raising Daniel, about the quiet years of widowhood I'd been learning to navigate. "Do you miss it?" he asked. "Being married?" I thought about that for a long moment. I miss having someone who knows how I like my coffee in the morning. I miss having someone to tell about the funny thing I saw at the grocery store. I miss— I paused, trying to find the right words. I miss mattering to someone. He reached across the table and took my hand. His fingers were calloused from years of construction work, but his touch was gentle. "You matter to me," he said. "You always have." The days that followed fell into an easy rhythm. Robert left for work each morning around 7, kissing my cheek and leaving me with instructions to make yourself at home. At first, I was afraid to touch anything, afraid to leave any trace of myself in his perfectly ordered life. But gradually, I began to settle in. I started cooking again, really cooking, not just heating up frozen meals for one. Robert came home to the smell of pot roast and homemade biscuits, and his face lit up like Christmas morning. "I haven't had a home-cooked meal in years," he said, closing his eyes as he tasted my cornbread. I'd forgotten what I was missing. I organized his kitchen, which had clearly been designed by someone who never actually cooked. I arranged his living room so the furniture faced the fireplace instead of the massive TV. I planted flowers in his window boxes and hung herbs to dry in his pantry. "You're transforming this place," he said one evening, watching me arrange fresh roses in a mason jar. It's never felt like home before. Just a house where I happen to sleep. I hope that's okay, I said, suddenly worried that I was overstepping. Evelyn, he said, taking the jar from my hands and setting it on the counter. I've been waiting 50 years for you to make this place feel like home. That's when he kissed me, soft and tentative at first, then deeper when I didn't pull away. It felt like coming home and going on an adventure all at the same time. I never stopped loving you, he whispered against my lips, even when I tried to, even when I thought I'd never see you again. I know, I whispered back. I know. 3 weeks after I'd moved in with Robert, Daniel called. I was in the kitchen, teaching Robert how to make my grandmother's apple pie, when my phone rang. Mom? His voice sounded different, smaller somehow. I've been trying to reach you. The motel said you checked out after one night. Where are you? I'm safe, I said, not offering any more details. But where? I've been worried. Worried. That was rich, considering he'd handed me money and watched me drive away with everything I owned in garbage bags. I'm staying with a friend, I said. What friend? You don't have any friends in Memphis. Not in Memphis, I said. In Nashville. There was a long pause. Nashville? Mom, what are you talking about? You don't know anyone in Nashville. Actually, I do. I looked at Robert, who was pretending to focus on rolling out pie crust while obviously listening to every word. An old friend from high school. Robert Hayes. Another pause, longer this time. A man? Yes, Daniel. A man. Mom, you can't just. You don't even know this person anymore. It's been 50 years. He could be anyone. He could be taking advantage of you. I almost laughed. Taking advantage of me? You mean like giving me a place to sleep and food to eat? Like treating me with kindness and respect? Like making me feel welcome in his home? That's not what I meant. Isn't it? Robert looked up from his pie crust and caught my eye. He smiled and mouthed, You okay? I nodded. Look, Daniel continued, why don't you come back to Memphis? Rachel and I have been talking, and we think we can make some room. Maybe set up the basement as a little apartment for you. The basement, where they kept their exercise equipment and holiday decorations. That's very generous, I said, but I'm happy where I am. Mom, be reasonable. You barely know this man. What if it doesn't work out? What if he changes his mind? Then I'll figure something else out, I said, like I've been doing my whole life. But what about family? What about family, Daniel? My voice was sharper than I'd intended. Where was family when I was sleeping in my car? Where was family when I needed a place to stay after losing everything? Silence. I have to go, I said. Robert and I are making pie. I hung up before he could respond. Robert set down his rolling pin and came over to where I was standing by the window, staring out at his garden without really seeing it. You okay? He asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind. I think so, I said, leaning back against his chest. It's just, he's my son. My only child. I never thought it would come to this. Maybe it won't, Robert said. Maybe he just needs time to adjust. I turned in his arms to face him. What if he never does? What if I have to choose between you and him? Then you choose yourself, he said firmly. You choose what makes you happy. You've spent your whole life putting other people first. It's your turn now. 2 months after I moved in with Robert, he proposed. Not with fanfare or elaborate planning. Just a simple question over morning coffee on his back porch. Marry me, he said, reaching across the table to take my hand. I looked at him, really looked at him, at the laugh lines around his eyes, at the way his hair curled at his collar, at the gentle strength in his hands. We're not kids anymore, Robert, I said. We're both set in our ways. You might get tired of having me underfoot all the time. Evelyn, he said, bringing my hand to his lips and kissing my knuckles. I've been tired of waking up alone for 50 years. I want to wake up next to you every morning for whatever time we have left. I thought about Frank then, about the 42 years we'd shared. He'd been a good husband, a faithful provider, a steady presence in my life. But Robert was something different. Robert was adventure and passion, and the road not taken. Robert was the part of myself I'd put away when I was young and responsible, and doing what was expected of me. Yes, I said. Yes, I'll marry you. We were married 3 weeks later in Robert's backyard, under the oak tree where I'd hung bird feeders and wind chimes. It was a small ceremony, just the minister, Robert's business partner as best man, and the neighbor woman who'd become my friend as matron of honor. I invited Daniel, not Rachel, just Daniel. He came, looking uncomfortable in his expensive suit, checking his phone during the ceremony and leaving immediately after the reception cake was cut. But he came, and that felt like something, at least. After the wedding, Daniel's tactics changed. Instead of the distant politeness he'd shown since the tornado, he became suddenly, aggressively interested in my life. Phone calls came weekly, then daily. Rachel sent flowers and expensive gifts, a cashmere scarf, a jewelry box, a set of Egyptian cotton sheets that probably cost more than I used to spend on groceries in a month. We just want you to be happy, Mom, Daniel said during one of his calls, and we want to make sure you're being careful. Careful about what? Well, Robert is obviously well off. His house, his business. You want to make sure his intentions are honorable, that he's not just looking for someone to take care of him in his old age. Daniel, I said slowly, Robert has been taking care of me. Not the other way around. But what about the future? What about inheritance, property rights? Have you discussed any of that? I hadn't, actually. Robert and I were too busy enjoying the present to worry much about the future. We spent our days working in the garden together, our evenings reading by the fireplace, our nights wrapped in each other's arms like teenagers who'd been given an unexpected second chance. But Daniel's questions planted seeds of doubt. Was I being naive? Was Robert too good to be true? Was I setting myself up for another heartbreak? Those doubts festered until the night I couldn't sleep and found myself wandering through Robert's house, looking at it with new eyes. The expensive furniture, the original artwork, the wine cellar I'd barely noticed. How much was it all worth? What would happen to me if Robert died first? What would happen to me if he got tired of me and asked me to leave? I was standing in his office, staring at a wall of awards and certificates, when Robert found me. Hey, he said softly, what are you doing up? Just looking around, I said, feeling guilty without knowing why. He came over and stood beside me, following my gaze to a framed certificate on the wall. Nashville Businessman of the Year, 2018, he read aloud. That was a good year. A lot of hard work paid off. You've done well for yourself, I said. We've done well, he corrected. You and me. These past few months have been the best of my life, Evelyn. Better than any business deal or award. I turned to look at him. What if it doesn't last? What if you get tired of me, or I get sick, or, hey, he cupped my face in his hands. Where is this coming from? I told him about Daniel's calls, about his questions and concerns. As I talked, Robert's expression grew darker. Your son is worried about my intentions, he said when I finished. He just wants to make sure I'm protected. Protected from what? From being loved? From being happy? From being taken advantage of? Robert was quiet for a long moment. Then he walked over to his desk, pulled out a folder, and handed it to me. Open it, he said. Inside were legal documents, a will, property deeds, insurance policies, all of them listing me as the primary beneficiary. I had these drawn up the week after you moved in, he said. Everything I have, everything I've built, it's yours now. Not because I'm planning to die anytime soon, but because I want you to know that you're safe, that you'll never have to sleep in your car again or beg anyone for a place to stay. I stared at the papers, feeling tears start to build behind my eyes. Robert, I can't accept this. It's too much. It's not enough, he said firmly. You gave up your whole life to take care of other people. Frank, Daniel, everyone but yourself. Let me take care of you for whatever time we have left. That night, we made love with a passion that surprised us both. Afterward, lying in his arms, I made a decision. I want to have Daniel and Rachel over for dinner, I said. Are you sure? Yes. It's time for some things to be said. I spent 3 days planning the dinner. Not because the menu was complicated. I was making pot roast and mashed potatoes, the same meal I'd cooked for Daniel 1,000 times when he was growing up, but because I wanted everything to be perfect. I wanted Daniel and Rachel to see exactly what they had dismissed, exactly what Robert valued. I used Robert's good china, the set his mother had left him that had been gathering dust in the dining room cabinet. I polished the silver candlesticks and arranged fresh flowers from the garden. I even bought a new dress, something I hadn't done in years. A soft blue number that brought out my eyes and made me feel pretty instead of invisible. You look stunning, Robert said, adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror. Are you ready for this? I think so, I said, though my hands were shaking slightly as I checked the roast one last time. Daniel and Rachel arrived exactly on time, because of course they did. Everything in their lives was scheduled and controlled, including their obligations to difficult family members. Mom, Daniel said, giving me a perfunctory hug, you look nice. This is quite a place, Rachel added, her eyes taking in the high ceilings and expensive furnishings with obvious calculation. Very impressive. Robert appeared from the living room, where he'd been building a fire in the fireplace. He was wearing a navy blazer and khakis, and he looked every inch the successful businessman he was. Daniel, he said, extending his hand, good to finally meet you. I've heard so much about you over the years. Daniel shook his hand with obvious reluctance. Mr. Hayes, Robert, please. We're family now. Rachel stepped forward, turning on the charm that had probably served her well in her marketing career. Robert, thank you so much for taking care of Evelyn. It's such a relief to know she's in good hands. Taking care of her? Robert's smile didn't waver, but something shifted in his eyes. I'm not taking care of Evelyn. We're taking care of each other. I served dinner in the formal dining room, the one Robert said he'd never used because it felt too big and lonely. With the four of us around the table, the candles flickering and the fire crackling in the next room, it felt warm and intimate. For the first 20 minutes, conversation stayed safely superficial. Rachel complimented the food and the house. Daniel asked polite questions about Robert's business. Robert told funny stories about construction mishaps and difficult clients. But I could feel the tension building underneath the pleasantries. Daniel kept glancing around the room, taking inventory. Rachel was doing that thing she did when she was networking, filing away information for later use. Finally, as I was serving dessert, my famous apple pie, the one Daniel had loved as a child, Rachel made her move. "So, Robert," she said, her voice casual, "have you and Evelyn discussed the practical aspects of your arrangement?" "What kind of practical aspects?" Robert asked, though his tone suggested he knew exactly what she meant. "Well, finances, property, that sort of thing. It's wonderful that you've been so generous. But Evelyn needs to think about her long-term security." "Rachel," Daniel said quietly, clearly uncomfortable with her directness, but not disagreeing with the sentiment. "It's a valid concern," she continued. "Evelyn has been through so much upheaval. We just want to make sure she's protected." Robert set down his fork and looked directly at her. "Protected from what, exactly?" "From uncertainty," Rachel said. "From finding herself in a vulnerable position again." "You mean like sleeping in her car in a Kroger parking lot after her own son gave her a few $100s and directions to the nearest motel?" The temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees. Daniel's face flushed red. "That's not fair," he said. "We were just—" "You were just— what?" Robert's voice was still calm, but there was steel underneath it. "Thinking of her comfort? Looking out for her best interests?" "We weren't prepared," Daniel said defensively. "Our house isn't set up for—" "Your house has 4 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms," I said quietly. I counted. Everyone turned to look at me. I'd been silent through most of the dinner, playing the gracious hostess. But now it was time for some things to be said. "I counted," I repeated, "when I was there. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, and a finished basement. But somehow, there wasn't room for me." "Mom, that's not—" "Let me finish," I said. And something in my voice must have warned him not to interrupt. "I raised you in a 2-bedroom house with 1 bathroom and a kitchen so small 2 people couldn't stand in it at the same time. But somehow, we always had room for anyone who needed help. When your friend Tommy's parents got divorced and he needed a place to stay, we made room. When Mrs. Henderson broke her hip and couldn't cook for herself, I brought her meals every day for 6 weeks. When the church asked us to host the new minister's family until they found a house, we gave them our bedroom and slept on the couch for 2 months." Daniel stared down at his plate. "But when I lost everything," I continued, "when I had nowhere else to go and came to my only child, the child I gave birth to and raised and sacrificed for, there wasn't room. There was money. There were directions to a motel. But there wasn't room." "We made a mistake," Daniel said quietly. "I know that now." "Yes, you did," Robert said. "But it wasn't just a mistake. It was a choice. A choice to prioritize your comfort over your mother's need. A choice to see her as an inconvenience rather than a blessing." Rachel shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "We were just trying to maintain appropriate boundaries." "Boundaries," Robert repeated. "Is that what you call it when you turn away your husband's mother who's just lost everything? We thought she'd be more comfortable." You thought you'd be more comfortable, Robert corrected. There's a difference. He stood up and walked over to the sideboard, where I'd placed some framed photos earlier in the week. He picked up one, a picture of Daniel as a little boy, grinning as he helped me plant tomatoes in our tiny backyard garden. Your mother has told me so many stories about you, he said, setting the photo in front of Daniel, about how proud she was when you graduated from college, about how she worked double shifts at the diner to help pay your tuition, about how she drove 8 hours to bring you chicken soup when you had the flu your senior year. Daniel wouldn't look at the photo. She told me about staying up all night when you were a baby with colic, walking the floors with you until you finally fell asleep, about teaching you to ride a bike and tie your shoes and do long division, about cheering at every single one of your Little League games, even the ones where you struck out every time you came to bat. Where are you going with this? Rachel asked. Robert looked directly at her. Where I'm going is this. Evelyn spent 30 years putting Daniel first. She sacrificed her own wants and needs and dreams to make sure he had every opportunity to succeed. And when she needed him, really needed him, he gave her money and showed her the door. It wasn't like that, Daniel protested. Wasn't it? Robert sat back down and leaned forward, his eyes never leaving Daniel's face. Tell me, what was it like? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you were embarrassed by your mother, embarrassed by her small town ways and her Walmart clothes and her garbage bags full of everything she owned. Embarrassed to have your girlfriend see where you came from. That's not true, Daniel said, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? Because if you'd wanted to help her, really help her, you would have found a way. You would have made room. You would have figured out a solution that didn't involve your 68-year-old mother sleeping in her car. Rachel opened her mouth to respond, but Robert held up a hand. I'm not finished, he said. Here's what I think happened. I think you got successful and forgot that success came from the foundation your mother built. I think you started seeing her as a reminder of a life you'd outgrown, rather than as the woman who made your current life possible. I think you got comfortable treating her like an obligation rather than a gift. He paused, letting that sink in. And I think, he continued, that now you're worried. Worried that I might be taking advantage of her financially, worried that you might lose out on an inheritance you never earned, but always assumed would be yours. Now wait just a minute, Daniel started. No, you wait, Robert said, his voice sharp for the first time all evening. You wait and you listen, because this conversation is 50 years overdue. He stood up again, walked to his desk in the corner of the room, and pulled out a folder, the same folder he'd shown me weeks earlier. These are my legal documents, he said, setting the folder on the table. Will, property deeds, insurance policies, everything I own, everything I've built over the past 40 years goes to Evelyn. Not because she asked for it, not because she manipulated me or seduced me or played any games, but because she deserves it. Because she deserves to be cared for and protected and cherished for whatever time she has left. Daniel stared at the folder like it might bite him. But here's the thing, Robert continued. She doesn't need my money. She doesn't need my house or my business or any of it. You know why? Because she has something more valuable than money. She has integrity. She has the knowledge that she lived her life with honor and put other people's needs before her own for 68 years. She has the satisfaction of knowing that she raised a son and buried a husband and survived a tornado and came through it all with her dignity intact. He looked directly at Rachel, and she has the wisdom to recognize real love when she sees it, instead of confusing it with a business transaction. Rachel's face was flushed now, her composed facade finally cracking. "You don't understand," she said. "You don't know what it's like to have someone just show up and expect." "Expect what?" I asked quietly. "Expect to be loved? Expect to matter to the people who are supposed to care about me?" "You were being dramatic," Rachel said. "The tornado was traumatic, obviously, but there were resources available. Social services, disaster relief. I didn't need social services," I said. "I needed my son." The room fell silent except for the crackling of the fire in the next room. Daniel was staring at his hands. Rachel was staring at the table. And Robert was watching all of us with sad eyes. Finally, Daniel looked up. "Mom," he said, and his voice sounded like it had when he was small and had done something wrong. "I'm sorry." "I know you are," I said. "But sorry doesn't undo what happened. Sorry doesn't erase the 3 nights I spent sleeping in my car, wondering what I'd done to deserve being treated like a stranger by my own child." "I was scared," he said. "I was scared of, I don't know, of you needing things I couldn't give, of you being sad all the time about Dad, of having to take care of you like you took care of Grandma those last few years. So instead of talking to me about your fears, you decided to get rid of me?" He flinched. "It wasn't supposed to be forever. I thought, I thought you'd find an apartment nearby and we'd see each other for lunch sometimes, and everything would go back to normal." "Normal?" I repeated. "You mean normal like the past 3 years, where we talked on the phone once a month and saw each other twice a year? Normal like me being a stranger in your life, someone you checked on out of obligation rather than love?" Daniel didn't answer. "Here's what's going to happen," Robert said, his voice calm but firm. "Evelyn and I are going to continue building a life together. We're going to travel and laugh and enjoy whatever time we have left. We're going to create new memories and honor old ones. We're going to love each other without conditions or limitations or fear." He looked at Daniel. "You and Rachel are welcome to be part of that life, if you can do it with genuine love and respect, not tolerance, not obligation, love." "And if we can't?" Rachel asked. Robert shrugged. "Then you can't. Evelyn has spent her whole life trying to earn love from people who should have given it freely. She's not going to spend her remaining years doing that anymore." "You're trying to turn her against her own son," Rachel accused. "No," I said, speaking for myself. "I'm choosing to surround myself with people who see my value instead of people who see my burden. If Daniel wants to be one of those people, he's welcome. But he has to choose it. Really choose it. Not just go through the motions." Daniel looked at me with tears in his eyes. "What if I can't? What if I've forgotten how?" "Then you'd better remember fast," I said, "because this is your last chance." Daniel and Rachel left shortly after that, claiming they had an early meeting the next day. But I could see in Daniel's eyes that he needed time to think, time to process what had been said. Robert and I cleaned up the dinner dishes in companionable silence, both of us lost in our own thoughts. "Do you think I was too hard on him?" I asked, as I dried the good china. I think you were exactly as hard as you needed to be, Robert said. Sometimes love means setting boundaries. Sometimes it means demanding to be treated with respect. He's my son, I said. My only child. And you're his mother. His only mother. That should count for something. Over the next few weeks, Daniel called regularly. Not the perfunctory monthly calls I'd grown accustomed to, but real conversations. He asked about my day, remembered details from previous conversations, told me stories about his work that went beyond the basic status updates he used to provide. Rachel, to her credit, backed off. No more expensive gifts. No more pointed questions about my relationship with Robert. She was polite when she answered the phone, but she left the relationship rebuilding to Daniel and me. I've been thinking about what Robert said, Daniel told me during one of our calls, about being embarrassed by you, about seeing you as an obligation instead of a gift. And he was right. I did get caught up in this idea of who I was supposed to be, this successful professional with the perfect life. Having a small-town mother with simple ways didn't fit that image. I never asked you to be ashamed of where you came from, I said. I know. That was all on me. And I'm sorry, Mom. I'm really, truly sorry. I know you are. Can you forgive me? I thought about that question for a long time. Could I forgive the son who'd given me money and watched me drive away with everything I owned in garbage bags? Could I forgive the man who'd been embarrassed by the woman who'd raised him? I can forgive you, I said finally, but I can't forget. And I can't go back to the way things were, where I was grateful for whatever scraps of attention you were willing to give me. I don't want to go back either, he said. I want to do better. I want to be the son you deserve. Then do it, I said. Don't tell me. Show me. And slowly, carefully, he did. A year later, I was working in Robert's garden, our garden now, when I heard a car pull into the driveway. I looked up to see Daniel getting out of his Mercedes, but this time, he wasn't alone. He opened the back door and helped two small children out of their car seats. My grandchildren, the ones I'd barely seen since Frank's funeral, the ones whose pictures Rachel posted on social media, but rarely shared in person. Grandma Evelyn! 6-year-old Emma squealed, running toward me with grass stains on her knees and dirt under her fingernails. Daddy said you have a garden. Can you show me how to grow tomatoes? 4-year-old Jake hung back shyly, clutching a stuffed dinosaur. But when I knelt down and opened my arms, he ran to me and buried his face against my shoulder. I missed you, he whispered. I missed you too, sweetheart, I said, breathing in the scent of his baby shampoo and feeling my heart expand in ways I'd forgotten were possible. Daniel walked over, looking nervous but determined. I thought maybe we could spend the day together, he said, if that's okay. Robert said he was going to teach the kids how to fish in the pond out back. That sounds perfect, I said. We spent the afternoon like a real family for the first time in years. The kids helped me weed the vegetable garden and pick strawberries. Robert showed them how to bait a hook and cast a line, even though Emma squealed every time a fish came close to her bait. We grilled hamburgers for dinner and ate them on the back porch while the kids chased fireflies in the yard. This is nice, Daniel said quietly, watching his children play. This feels like home. It is home, I said, for all of us, whenever you want it to be. Later that evening, after Daniel had loaded the sleepy children back into their car seats and driven home to Memphis, Robert and I sat on the porch swing, watching the stars come out. You're happy, he observed. I am, I said, surprised by how true it was. For the first time in years, I'm genuinely happy. Even with everything that happened, even with the tornado and Daniel and all of it, I thought about that question. A year ago, I'd lost everything I thought mattered: my house, my belongings, my sense of security, my faith in my son's love. But in losing those things, I'd found something else. I'd found Robert, of course, but more than that, I'd found myself again. I'd found my voice, my strength, my ability to demand to be treated with respect. Especially because of all that, I said. I had to lose everything to realize what I was worth. I had to be rejected to understand that I deserved better. I had to sleep in my car to remember that I was strong enough to survive anything. Robert took my hand and squeezed it gently. And now I know that home isn't a place, I said. It's not a house or a town or even a family you're born into. Home is wherever you're loved and valued and seen for who you really are. And where is that for you? I looked at him. This man who'd waited 50 years to love me, who'd taken me in when I had nothing, and made me feel like I was everything. Right here, I said, with you. 2 years later, Robert and I were featured in the Nashville newspaper's Golden Love Stories series. The reporter, a young woman barely older than my granddaughter, wanted to know the secret to finding love later in life. It's not about finding love, I told her. It's about finding yourself first. It's about knowing your worth and refusing to accept anything less than you deserve. But wasn't it scary? She asked. Starting over at your age? I thought about that night in the Kroger parking lot, when I'd felt more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. About the moment Daniel had handed me money instead of offering me a home. About the fear I'd felt calling Robert after 50 years of silence. Yes, I said. It was terrifying. But you know what was more terrifying? The idea of spending the rest of my life apologizing for taking up space. The idea of being grateful for scraps when I deserved a feast. And now, I looked around Robert's, our living room, where Emma's artwork hung on the refrigerator and Jake's dinosaur toys lived in a basket by the fireplace, where Daniel came for Sunday dinners and helped Robert fix the fence and called to ask my advice about work problems, where Rachel had slowly, cautiously begun to build a real relationship with me, one based on mutual respect rather than obligation. Now I know that it's never too late to write a new chapter, I said. It's never too late to demand to be loved the way you deserve to be loved. And it's never too late to come home to yourself. If you've ever felt invisible, cast aside, or taken for granted by the people who should love you most, remember this. Your worth doesn't decrease because someone fails to see it. Your value doesn't diminish because someone chooses to ignore it. You deserve to be loved, cherished, and celebrated, not tolerated, managed, or endured. Sometimes the greatest act of love is loving yourself enough to walk away from people who make you feel small. Sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is refuse to accept less than you deserve. And sometimes the most radical thing you can do is believe that your story isn't over. It's just beginning. Have you ever had to choose between your dignity and someone else's comfort? Have you ever had to leave behind people who couldn't see your worth to find people who could? Share your story in the comments below. Because your voice matters, your experience counts, and your courage might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Don't forget to subscribe to Grandma True Stories for more tales of resilience, second chances, and the unstoppable power of women who refuse to be invisible. Because every grandmother has a story worth telling, and every story has the power to change a life. Remember, it's never too late to come home to yourself.